My guest today on the podcast is Robert McKee. Robert McKee is regarded by many as one of the greatest experts on the subject of story and in particular screenwriting in the world. He has presented his story seminar hundreds of times all around the globe over the past 30 years to screenwriters, novelists, playwrights, poets, you name it. Those who have learned from McKee have called him the Aristotle of our time because of his insight into the substance and structure of the art of story. McKee's former students include over 60 Academy Award winners, 200 Academy Award nominees, 200 Emmy Award winners, 1,000 Emmy Award nominees, and much more. I could go on and on, but I think we'd rather let him talk. So I am beyond thrilled to welcome to the podcast, Robert McKee. You are listening to the Essential Coaching Skills Podcast, a show devoted to uncovering the systems and the secrets that set the best apart, where you learn how to take your coaching clients to the next level, while you grow the coaching practice of your dreams. So sit back and relax, or sit up and get excited. Either way, you might want to pay attention. This could be important. Whoa, Robert McKee in person.
Thank you, Doug. Pleasure to be here.
Oh my God, I'm so thrilled. I would like to just be the first to wish you a happy Valentine's Day.
It's not only Valentine's Day, it's also my anniversary.
Oh my God.
My wife and I.
You're here with me. That's you have your priorities.
We'll be going to a really nice restaurant. But it's our 20th.
Wow.
So
the anniversary. Happy Valentine's Day. I'm beyond thrilled to have you here.
We got married on Valentine's Day for the obvious reason. Yeah. So that I would not forget the anniversary.
And that's working out pretty good, is it?
It works. Yeah.
Very nice. Well, Robert, I must say I'm very happy to having a friendly conversation with you because I first heard of you from the movie adaptation, where you were a fictional character and being played by Brian Cox, I believe it was, the actor, and he was mean. He was a mean guy, and so I was kind of afraid of meeting Robert McKee, and then I took your story seminar a few years ago, and it was really fun and funny, and you were delightful. And I was like, what a relief that is. So it's really nice to meet you.
Well, Brian Cox's meanness as me is relative. I've sat in audiences a number of times watching that film. And when Nicolas Cage asks the question, yes, well, what about people, what about characters or people in whose lives nothing happens? Nothing happens. Then what do you do? And that's when the McKee character goes down his throat.
Yeah. He says, what do we want to write about real life? So real life?
Because that kind of thinking is really elitist. That most people, nothing happens in their lives. I mean, that's just absurd. People suffer. They have ups and downs, mostly downs, from one end of their life to the other, struggling with relationships, with their own mind, with their own self, with the world to achieve. People are in a constant struggle to get out of life something of value. And the notion that these people's lives have nothing happening is, as I said, what college professors, what brainy people in their arrogance would think about people who work for a living. And so I find personally, I would find that question were to happen in real life, I would do exactly what Brian Cox did.
So that's a very good question. So how much of that information from that character would you agree with? Was it all pretty accurate? Was it pretty good representation of?
Well, my son says he Xeroxed me.
He Xeroxed you.
He said, I took my son to to an early screening at the studio, and it's one thing I have played myself on screen before, and then to see yourself portrayed is an experience, of course. But imagine what it's like for a son to see his father portrayed. And so after the end of the evening, I went to Paul and I said, "What'd you think?" And he said, "Dad, he got you. He Xeroxed you." and so I took that. I chose Brian Cox to play me.
Oh, you personally chose him?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Cool.
Yeah, because I'll tell you what, they gave me a list of actors. I mean, everybody from Christopher Plummer to Michael Caine, the
Michael
top
Caine.
10. Yeah.
I would love to see Michael Caine do Robert.
Well, it was the top 10 middle-aged actors and English actors. It was all English actors.
Why is that? Why?
And
you're from Detroit. How come?
well, that was I took that as a compliment because that was how the director and the writer saw me as somehow international.
Okay.
And of the world. And so I mean they and when they gave me the list, I demanded. I said, I can't tell you who exactly to cast because availabilities being what they are.
Yeah.
But I want you give me a list, and I want my choice. And because I had to know what their philosophy was. For all I knew, this was the Danny DeVito, Aykroyd school of casting.
Right.
And so they gave me this list of British actors, and I was very pleased. And I looked down the list, and they were all wonderful. I said, I get it, but I want Brian Cox. And they said, "Who's Brian Cox?" And I said, "He's the best British actor you don't know."
Wow.
So they went to London and they auditioned him, and of course they cast him. And the reason I wanted Brian Cox, if you're interested in this sort of thing, is all these actors, and they're wonderful actors, underneath everything they do, whether they're playing a good guy, a bad guy, or whatever, is a sense of love me, love me. Yes, I'm hard on people. Yes, I'm tough. Yes. But in my heart is in the right place. Love me, love me, love me. There's always this thing inside almost every actor's performance to try to draw empathy to themselves. But not Brian Cox.
And you didn't think that was true to your character?
No, I don't want to be loved. I don't. I want to be respected.
Okay.
But I don't want to be loved. I don't, I lecture to hundreds of people at a time. Back in the heyday, 12, 15 seminars a year everywhere in the world. And I don't want these people attaching themselves to my coattails and becoming followers and, constantly calling me, sending emails, sending scripts. Okay? They teach, they learn what I teach. They take it into their work, and now I wish them well. I wish them, great success. But I do not want to be loved. I don't want to be followed. I just want them to learn. And I knew that Brian Cox would give the kind of performance that says, this is the truth. Deal with it as you will, but do not follow me around. So that's why I cast Brian.
I do have a question for you, just for the listeners here. Our audience is Essential Coaching Skills podcast. So many of our listeners are coaches or therapists, people who work with people, and storytelling is part of a way of getting across a message, a healing tale, if you will. So I'm just want people to know that, you are coming from a different area, and yet story can work in so many different ways. And one of your great...
It's the same principle. Look, a therapist doesn't want their patient identifying with them.
All right. Sure.
Therapist doesn't want a personal relationship. If personal relationships in therapy are disastrous for both people.
All right. No, that's
Freud knew that, right? Freud had a name for it. What do you call it? I don't know. It was a term, not identification, but when the patient starts to
transference, I believe.
Transference.
Yeah. Right.
And he
Which can
knew
be
the
really
danger.
useful to know if you understand it.
Pardon?
I said it can be a very useful thing to know and work with if you understand it, transference and countertransference, but you don't want it happening just willy-nilly.
A line has to be drawn.
So tell me about story. Tell me about how story is about life, as a metaphor for life and learning. And without story, we wouldn't have, much of a civilization. I think that's a quote, close to a quote of yours.
Well, human beings, I mean, God, we don't know when, okay, but somewhere hundreds of thousands of years ago, some proto-human thought, the first human thought, which is, I'm imagining, I am. And that separated human beings from animals. Mm-hmm. Human beings are the only animal with the capacity to see themselves as an object. Animals react to the objects around them in their world, and they respond to their own bodies and all the rest of it, but they cannot separate themselves from themselves. So at some point, the first human being did that. They thought the thought, I exist, I am. The second thought was, and someday I will not be. And at that point in evolution, a living thing became conscious of itself as a self and of time, and the realization that time will end and that they will go out of existence. Right? The stress of that is so enormous, and this is why human beings suffer in ways nothing else does. Human beings suffer, existential sufferings, and of a magnitude and a quality nothing else does. And so the realization that someday you're going to die forces you to ask the question how and why and when and whatever, and so suddenly a human being is trying to understand things about the world that no other creature does, which is how does the world work?
All right.
How does reality in fact work? Animals just react to reality. Human beings can imagine reality. They imagine their own death. They imagine time. They imagine, and they struggle to figure out how things work because their survival depends upon it. And so to make sense out of life, human beings began to create stories. I'm guessing, and there's no way to know, but the first stories were actually not told in a sense. They were probably danced. My guess is that around the fire, the earth, from Neanderthals or even before, people would get up and they would act out the hunt.
Right.
They would act out the fights. Because I was an anthropology major, and I remember reading once that prior to, I don't know what, 5,000 BC, 10,000 BC, 70% of all human beings died at the hands of another human being.
Huh.
And so they acted out fights,
Right.
they acted out hunting, they acted out, and of course there was all this unexplained phenomenon like thunder and lightning and wind and all the rest. And so my guess is that the first art form, even before the cave paintings, was dance, where people were trying to make sense out of and prepare each other for here's what you do when you go on a hunt, here's what you do when somebody hunts you,
Right.
right? And so that would be the first form of storytelling, and it's as a great critic Kenneth Burke once said, stories are equipment for living. And so we tell stories to understand life, to what it is to be a human being, what you can or cannot do in certain circumstances, to try to give you a sense of expectation of what's the possibilities in the future, and so the need to tell a story, as I said, is born in the realization that you're going to die.
Right. Right. Gotcha.
Stories are all about equipment for living.
So on that vein, since today is Valentine's Day and it's all about love and love stories and things, stories are probably a pretty good way for human beings to learn about what love is and how to react to love or be in relationships.
Yes, yes, of course. And
Do you tell?
so we tell those stories all the time.
Do you teach
We
a
tell
separate
probably
course?
the most common form of love stories is not romance, especially today. The most common form of love stories is family dramas.
Mm-hmm.
It's about the love relationships within a family. That if you you look on the TV and you look at what's available when like Secession, for example, talk about Brian Cox, is a family drama, right?
Right.
So that form of love, that child parent sibling love, is a great question. Because I've asked people occasionally, if you have a friendship and you have a brother or sister, family member, and each of them betrays you, your friend betrays you, and your family betrays you, which is worse?
The family.
No.
No?
No, that's not my survey. My survey, people said betrayal of a friend is worse.
Huh.
And the reason they gave that answer was because they said, look, you're thrown into a family.
Right.
Right?
You pick your friend.
It's not your choice.
Right.
You have to deal with these people, whether you like it or not. Okay. And so that Cain and Abel, the brother against brother, that the family betrays you is terrible.
Yeah.
But not that surprising. But you choose your friends.
Right.
You choose to become intimate with your friends. You tell them things that you've never told anyone, even your family.
Right. That's for sure.
And so you share with friends intimacies of the most poignant kind, and you trust that they won't betray you. When they do, it's a heartbreaker. So there's those kinds of love, and then of course there's some romantic love. But the big romantic love is an idealistic love, where you become the best person you can be to be attractive to the other person. They're trying to be the best person they can be to be attractive to you, and so there's a lot of idealizing going on. And so that seeking commitment
Mm-hmm.
in a relationship, marriage, or something like it, that's romance in a way. But the bigger love is companionate love that exists between couples as they move from romantic love to companionate love.
Right.
That's a big step.
Sure.
And because ultimately, romanticism is an idealization, and ultimately, reality sets in.
Yeah.
I mean, I can imagine any number of the human beings who fell in love, pursued each other in courtships, got married, went on a honeymoon, sat on a terrace overlooking some blue water out there somewhere, and looked across the terrace at that other person and asked themselves, "Who the hell is that?" And suddenly realizing they're in a legal, and therefore a binding relationship with someone they don't really know. They've only known them for six months under the best of circumstances. They had the wedding.
But I would think that that's a
They
perfect reason.
got to move to another level.
That seems like that would be a perfect reason for the existence of love stories, movies, et cetera, that would teach people how to avoid that sort of situation. How do you make sure that there's a way of roadmap, if you will, so that you can,
I don't think it's avoidable.
uh,
I don't see how it is.
okay.
No, not really. I mean, you look. I don't. How long have you and your wife known each other?
We've known each other for 30 some odd years, 31, 32 years, 33.
Doesn't she still surprise you?
Oh, yeah.
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 And
Gotcha.
one of these days, she may really surprise
Let's hope not too much. Yeah, I hear you.
and you her. Okay.
Yeah.
And people change, and for better and for the worse, relationships undergo change. I don't see how you can possibly prepare yourself for the notion that nothing that ever happens to another human being that changes that person will affect the relationship. That's out of the question. These things are going to happen. You're going to either cope with them or you're not.
Okay.
And so I don't think you can ever prepare for life in a way that no matter what happens, you're ready.
Okay. So let me ask you a
In
question
fact,
about.
sorry, Doug, that's fundamental to storytelling.
Go ahead.
The essential moment in any story, in every scene, virtually in every beat of every scene, is the violation of expectation.
Okay.
Character enters a scene with certain desires. They have what we call a scene intention. There's something they want in that immediate now, in that place.
Mhm.
They have something they want out of life, and they want to take a step toward it. And so they in this scene, they need to get whatever, right? If what they think will happen happens, if the other people in the scene react the way the character expected, if they themselves react the way they expected, and everything happens the way they expected, that is an absolutely dreadful scene.
It's a boring scene, yeah.
Boring as it possibly can be, because it's not what matters.
All right.
What matters is you go into a moment in life with with a desire and an expectation. If I do this, that'll cause that person to say this or do that, and I'll get what I want. And you take that action, and and they react in a way you never saw coming.
Mhm.
And they do or say things that are just off the wall. And suddenly a gap opens up between expectation and result. The violation of expectation forces the character now to look into themselves, to look into the other person, to look into the circumstances and figure out how and why did what just happen. What can I do now and improvise? What can I do now in order to continue to pursue what I want?
Okay.
And because that is the essence of life, is that you're constantly having to improvise when things, happen in ways you can't predict. And
Is
so the
that
violent
basically
expectation is the stuff and substance of story.
the inciting incident as well? That there's a gap between.
Yeah, inciting incident is a big one of those.
Is a big one of those.
Yeah. Inciting incident is the event that starts the story that throws life radically out of balance and arouses the desire that the character wants. And so the inciting incident could be a coincidence. I mean, literally lightning strikes. Or it could be a decision. Somebody says, I want to change my life, and decides to do that. And so it could be a choice the character makes or a random coincidence that happens to them. Either way. But now their life is out of balance.
Right.
Now they need something, a situation, a change, something. Could be a thing, could be money, could be whatever. They need something to put life back into balance, and they go in pursuit of that. And they go, scene by scene, they go into situations with expectations. And those expectations are constantly being violated. And so they have to improvise. They have to use themselves in ways they've never before. They have to have an understanding of things they never had before. And on it goes.
Right. It's fascinating to me because, I'm interested in very short stories, like moth storytelling, 5-minute stories kind of thing. But it still has to have that. I mean, seems like all story has to have something like that in it in order for it to be a story.
Yeah. Otherwise, it's a poem. You can describe a feeling in a poem. You could describe a sunset in a poem. You can describe a desire in a poem. And a poem, many poems have a pivot, of course, where things do change. But a poem could be static in a sense that it's just language used like music to express a feeling and an experience of some kind. And there's no turning point. But that's poetry.
So a story needs to have a turning point at some point.
Things change.
Yeah.
Why do we tell stories? For a lot of reasons, but the biggest motivation is to cope with change.
Okay.
And in any story, the lives of the characters at the end of the story is not what it was at the beginning.
Right.
Things have changed, and they have struggled. They may or may not get what they want, but they're not the same as they were. And stories then, try to prepare us for change of what could happen in circumstances in the future, and give us some insight into how to cope.
Got it. So that's just on the real basic thing. How do you define story? What is a story? And it said it's different from a poem. It's different from just a set of facts, like an assembly line of first this happened, then that happened, then this happened, that happened. So it's not just a assemblage. How do you define stories per se?
Well, it's an arc of change. I mean, that's what's essential to it.
Okay.
But it's changed through conflict.
Conflict.
It's not like change in the weather.
All right.
And so a story is some representation of humanity, because even if it's a cartoon or whatever, I mean, Bugs Bunny represents human beings, a certain kind of human being, and so there's a character who's a metaphor for humanity, who struggles to achieve a desire, and their life undergoes change for better or worse.
Do stories always have to
in a
have an
nutshell.
antagonist?
Well, there's some negative force.
Some negative force.
The great stories often the antagonist is the character himself or herself. I mean, their own inner conflicts, their own contradictory desires. I mean, in many ways, human beings are their own worst enemies, and so there will be conflict, but at what level and from what direction, who can say? Because life, is a multi-level. There's the whole subconscious world in a human being, and then there's all your conscious thoughts, your personal relationships, friends, family, lovers, social conflicts, institutions and individuals in society who block your way, and then of course all the forces of time and space, especially time, running out. And so life is a multi-layered, huge, massively complex experience, and so where those forces of antagonism can come from any of those levels or any combination of those levels. So it doesn't there's no necessary need for an antagonist.
Gotcha.
That force, that negative force, doesn't have to be personified.
Got it.
I just published a book on the action genre, and in the action genre, the negative force is personified. There's a villain,
Right.
there's an antagonist, okay, but that's not. There's no necessity for that. It's just one way to bring a negative force into to interact with a human being's desire.
Do you have a concept in your book called the negation of the negation? And I have to admit, I haven't been able to quite grasp that entirely. What is the negation of the negation?
It's my fault. When I wrote Story, which was over 25 years ago, I hadn't myself figured it out. I knew what it was. I knew that what the negation of the negation is. But I couldn't figure out exactly. So I didn't explain it as well as I have in the lectures ever since. But very simply, there are negative forces in life, some of which are just sort of contrary to what you want, and they resist what you want. But then there are forces that are contradictory, that are the direct opposite of what you want. Love, hate, life, death, freedom, slavery, justice, injustice. Those are the direct opposites of the positive, okay?
Mm-hmm.
But they are not the limit of human experience. In terms of justice, the limit of human experience is not crime, breaking the law, injustice. It gets much worse than that. In terms of love, the hatred is not the worst of things. People who say, I hate you, and they mean it, that's bad. It's not the worst. And so the negation of the negation is you take that negative, like hate or injustice, and you make it all the more powerful by one of two things that are not in the book, and this is why people didn't quite get it. You take what is negative, like hatred. Hatred is honest. When somebody says, I hate you, and they mean it, it's ugly, but it's honest.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Yep. And you take that and you hide it behind a lie. So hatred masquerading as love.
Ah,
Someone
ah,
who pretends, someone who pretends to love you, who dupes
ah,
you into thinking that they love you, while they really hate you and are out to destroy you. And that's far worse than an honest hatred.
yeah.
Or you take hatred, which is directed at the world, I hate you, okay? And you turn it inward on the character.
Ah,
And so even a misanthrope loves one person. But when you take hatred and you turn it inward on a character, it becomes self-hate. And self-hate is the deepest, most powerful form of hatred.
hmm,
Worse than just hating other people. And so the negation of the negation is, how can you take what is negative and make it all the more powerful in a story? You either disguise it with a lie,
mhm.
or you take what is normally thrown at the world and you turn it inward on your character. And in one of those two ways, you magnify the power of the negative side of the story and force a character to cope with forces in life that they would, never normally have to confront, to take that character to the limit of their human experience.
Got it. That makes total sense. Thank you. I wish you'd told me that 30 years ago. I'm just kidding.
Well, I'm writing story 2.
Oh, are you really?
Yeah, I'm just finishing chapter 2, story 2, as we speak. And so it'll be out, I don't know, a year or two. And so when story 2 comes out, it'll be, I mean, story 1 was written 25, 26 years ago, and I've learned a lot in those years. And so
It
story 2
brings me
was,
to another question: is how do you do so much stuff? I mean, I would listen to an interview of you the other day where you were talking about long form storytelling and in television, and there's seasons after season of things, and you seem to have watched them all, and you're also lecturing all over the planet, and you're also writing books, and I mean, how many hours are in your day there, Robert?
that's an illusion. No, I love it.
Yeah.
So um, you find time. And second of all, when you really love something and it obsesses you in a sense, when you look like you're not working, you're working.
Hmm.
So I'm sitting there, having dinner, and I am fascinated with whatever I encountered that day, there's enough time in the day if you just don't waste it.
Right, right.
And
Does
then
your wife share your love of story?
she's a novelist.
Okay.
Yeah,
So do you watch
she
the TV shows together? Do you watch
we do,
right?
Yeah, she's a writer. She's got a wonderful novel called Me Then.
Nice.
comma then. It's semi-autobiographical, but she could have called it a memoir, but she invented too much. So Me Then is a beautifully told story. She's a wonderful writer, and you were mentioning short stories, and she's working on some short stories right now. So we share that. We she's a musician as well, and a good part of her life she spent as a rather well-known New York painter.
Really?
So she's got great talent. She went to school up in New York at the Eastman School of Music at the
Sure.
University of Rochester,
Yeah.
and so she was a operatic soprano in her
Wow.
youth. Then she became a painter, then became a writer. She's just
Cool.
bursting with talent.
Wow. Must be quite a household. My heavens. That's awesome. So let me ask you this: all these concepts that are so, in the long form storytelling of season after season of television, or in a full length movie or a full length play or whatever, I can totally see how all this has room to work itself out. What do you do? Like, I know you wrote a book called Storynomics. How do you apply this to advertising or marketing or anything short form like that?
Well, the best way it's about persuasion, and marketing is persuasion.
Mhm.
And so you're trying to persuade people to hire your service or buy your product,
Right.
and using a story, putting it in story form, is the most effective, powerful way to persuade people to hire your service, purchase your product. And what's normally done in marketing is bragging and promising.
All right.
We're
Advertising.
the biggest, we're the best, right? We're the newest, and promising we'll do this for you, we'll do that for you, whatever. It's bragging and promising. And in business school, they call that what do they call that? There's terms, very new for terms for it. But it's bragging and promising. It says features and benefits. That's
There you
the
go. Yeah,
business term, features and benefits, right? And the risk is by bragging and promising, people react to it, against it, because they'll sense it's bullshit.
All right.
You can't fulfill that promise. It's not, your product is not really superior. It's just like everybody else's, and it does what everybody else's does, etc. And if it's the cheapest, it probably does it worse than anybody else. And so there's a very cynical audience out there now. So marketing becomes very, very difficult. And but a story, if you can get them to identify with the protagonist of a story and take that character through a couple turning points and show how your product or your service solves their problem.
Mm-hmm.
If you go from problem to solution in a storyfied way, and get your client or your consumer to identify with your protagonist and realize that you understand them. When a company makes it clear, we know what the problem in your life, we empathize with you struggling with that problem, we have researched and developed something that will help you enormously solve that problem, and here's how it's going to happen. And if you tell them a story that takes them from problem to solution with a character with whom they can identify, that moves them to go out into the world and repeat that story in their own life, to buy your product, hire your service. The problem with all this, is it's really, really hard to do. Storytelling demands talent, creativity of the highest order, great imagination, knowledge, insight, skill. Okay? Bragging and promising.
Much easier.
PowerPoint presentations in business is simply a junior high school essay with special effects. That's the PowerPoint. You did it when you were 12 years old.
Right.
Here's what I'm going to tell you. Here's what I'm telling you. Here's what I told you. Right? It's junior high school essay with special effects. Okay? Anybody can do that. Anybody can do that. Okay? Telling the story demands creativity and talent. And most people in business don't have either of them.
Right. So who's
You have to hire people. You have to, if you really want to do it, you have to do it right. And then that's why you go to ad agencies.
what's an example of somebody who did it right?
Oh, uh, the Amazon does it, but not just Amazon. I'm sorry. This happens when you get into your 80s. Names just fly out, right?
I think that you.
Well, let me ask you. Let me ask you. What's your favorite ad on TV and who made it?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think these days, I think it's beer commercials actually are pretty amazing. Yeah. But I was also thinking of, I'm talking to you on an Apple computer here, and Apple used to have some.
Apple's great. Apple gets it really. Yeah, Apple does it really well, especially around Christmas time. And a lot of makers of cell phones. A number of cell phone ads are wonderfully told stories. And you're right about beer commercials. I never thought that. The Apple has always, throughout its history, has always been a good storyteller.
Yeah. I will admit that I have.
For example,
Go ahead.
One of the worst storytellers is an Apple competitor called IBM. IBM can't tell a story with crap. I don't know why, but they just can't. And it's all bragging and promising, and it's all, I don't know why they, I have a suspicion, I don't know who the executives are at IBM or other companies, but a lot of executives, a lot of people in the C-suites do not trust stories. To them, stories mean fairy tales, stories mean bullshit, etc. To them, storytelling is childish. And so when somebody comes into the C-suite and says, here's the story we're going to tell about our product, there's a pushback. And I suspect at IBM, the pushback is severe. Whereas at Apple, they have a different culture. And Apple just says, come tell me a story. I mean, they've done it for decades. And so some companies are much better at it than others. But the ones who don't tell stories or don't tell them very well, I suspect, are those companies where the executives are really suspicious. They don't trust it.
But I think you made the point once that more and more these days, it's not only good, but it's kind of necessary because people have become so just turned off to the advertising.
Yeah, young people, millennials and Gen Zs.
I mean, they have ad blockers on their phones.
They've heard advertising of all kinds all their lives.
Yeah.
People are constantly pushing things at them and to buy, and they're sick of it. I mean, they don't buy any of it, but they go online and their friends say, I bought this and I tried that and whatever, and if their friends like it, then they and the word of mouth then spreads. But yeah, young people are adverse to conventional marketing. They resist it, but tell them a good story and
they're
with you like anybody else.
So we're talking about this. I'm remembering. I think it was the 90s, maybe it was even earlier. But there was an ad campaign that went on for quite some time, kind of a long form advertising campaign for Apple versus IBM.
Yeah. There were 60 of those.
60.
60 variations. Yeah. John Hodgman. John Hodgman must have made enough money
Right. Yeah. Right.
to
Here's the
retire.
IBM.
I mean, I'm sure he did, in fact, because John Hodgman now is an essayist, a very comic, wonderful essayist who appears occasionally in the New York Times. And that seems to be all he cares about in life, because I think those IBM commercials, those, not the IBM commercials, those Apple commercials, made him and his partner excessively rich. But they were brilliant, just brilliant.
Yeah, and it's fascinating to me because they stick in your mind too. That's the other thing about story, is it's not just, this thing is like features and benefits. It's like there's something that sticks with you. You tell your friends about it. You
remember the one where the John Hodgman is counting money, and what was the computer flaw that I don't know if it was the Dell computer, but no, the IBM computer had what was it? I forget the name of it. There was a flaw. God, this is 30 some years ago. And he's counting up money for advertising, fix the problem. Advertising, fix the problem. Right. And the Apple computer says, "Do you think that much money is going to fix that problem?" And Hodgman looks at it and he pushes the money into the big pile. So now we just put it all on advertising. I mean, that's a wonderful story, right?
Yeah, no, it's true.
Turning point, greatly told. Problem. Yeah. And the solution, of course, is ironic in that it's no solution at all. So, yeah, those things stick.
Yeah, exactly.
Whereas the bragging about any product is forgotten almost instantly.
So tell us about your you have a kind of catchphrase in your story thing, which is to write the truth. So
yeah, whenever I autograph a book, that's the inscription.
So tell me about that.
It's the admonition against cliche. Storytelling is so prolific and has been for centuries that it has encrusted itself with countless cliches.
Mm-hmm.
And so people use a cliche is a really good idea, a really superb idea that somebody had a long time ago.
Yeah.
And because it's such a good idea, it's been used again and again and again and again, become a cliche. And in the rush that writers have to sell, to make a living from their writing, the urge to sell their writing, their impulse is to copy what is successful. And that means all that, tends to mean a lot of cliches.
All right.
And so I tell them, no, write the truth. It means sit down with whatever you're doing. You learn from the past, of course, but you examine your own writing and you ask yourself, do I believe it?
Mm-hmm.
Do I believe my own writing? Do I believe that my characters who do the things they're doing, be confronted with the negative forces of life that they're confronted with, that they would act the way they act in an effort to get what they want? Do I actually believe this? Is this the truth of what it is to be a human being from my point of view? It's not about absolute truth, because there is no such thing. But there is subjective truth. There is what you believe to be true.
Got it.
And if you express, dramatize beautifully what you believe to be true, you will find readers, you will find an audience of people who will nod and go, yeah, that's life, that's true.
Hmm.
And so I write the truth is just a step in the war on cliches, and to try to get writers to trust themselves. And, but I know how hard it is, because if you're really honest, you realize that the vast majority of experiences in life are negative.
Hmm.
If you're really honest, you realize that the vast majority of human beings go to their grave with a sense of having, in some large way, failed.
Hmm.
As parents, as human beings, as artists, as whatever, they were disappointed, if nothing else, that they didn't get more out of life than they got. And that very, very few people go to their grave with a big smile on their face, thinking I've led the most satisfying possible life, and I've done everything and more of what I'm capable of now. Okay. And so the truth of life is that the negative outweighs the positive. But then, in an effort to sell, their fear is I will turn people off. Although, the greatest stories ever told are tragedies. But nonetheless, they're afraid of the negative. But if you go today, if you look at what's on the screen, especially in long form television today, it's almost all negative.
Hmm.
Dark stories. In fact, I'm going to write a little piece from my people on the modern, the new, today's anti-hero. And anti-heroes today are different than the anti-heroes of the past. And the anti-heroes of the past, yes, they were opposed to society, and that's what made them anti, but in their heart of hearts, they had a core of goodness.
Right.
Right? And so even the Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid have their friendship. I mean, there's a positive somewhere in there. Now, anti-heroes are really anti. And there's nothing lovable about any of them, except they've got brains.
Hmm.
And they're Walter White. They have huge brains, even though they're dark as they can be.
Hmm.
And it's that mental power and achieving, like Walter White does, what you want out of life. I'm going to do a little piece, give you a little preview. There's three. I just caught up with these three films for TV, and I enjoy them all. Here, Emily the Criminal, a film called Old Henry, and one I just saw last night, 99 Homes. The protagonists of all three of those are the modern anti-hero. And even the title tells you, Emily the Criminal. Okay? And it's all about survival.
That's great.
The greatest value now is just survival.
Yeah.
If you have to become a criminal, in order to survive, do it really, really well.
Do it really well. Exactly.
And that's Emily the Criminal. She does it really, really well. She's got real guts. She's tough as nails. I love it.
Even with the anti-heroes, though, they have that gap between the expectation and the result. So the drama is, can they get across that gap, or can they find a way to get that thing? So it's still there.
The most current anti-hero does not have a moral center.
Hmm.
Not anymore. And so my sense of things is that society is catching on to the darker, deeper truths that that in the past were too from the modern point of view, very romantic, very idealistic, very Pollyanna, and so the writing is getting darker and darker, and I think that's wonderful.
You think it's wonderful?
Yeah,
because
we finally going to understand human beings for what they really are.
Hmm.
There's wars all over this world, but there's one big one going on right now. And if that is not the most powerful exercise in darkness, I don't know what is. Here we are in the 21st century. Human beings, driven by their own obsessions, blinded by lies, attacking and killing other human beings. I mean, this. And so, how can you tell stories today and pretend it's all going to turn out all right?
Okay.
So, from what I see now, the best writing is really good writing, and writers are exploring the dark side of human nature in ways they've never done before, and I think that's wonderful because that's the ultimate purpose of story is to express to one another what it is to be a human being, honestly.
Wow. And some of your long form television shows like Breaking Bad is what the sort of things you're thinking about?
Oh, but Better Call Saul is even better.
Better Call Saul.
Better Call Saul is the best long form series I know yet, and Better Call Saul is an exploration of darkness with a complexity and a wonderful dark comic sense. Just brilliant, just brilliant.
I watched an episode of Horace and Pete yesterday for the first time. I've heard you talk about it. Yeah, heard you talk about it in an interview that you did, and I'd never even heard of it. And so
you had to pay money to see it. Would you pay $10 or something?
I think it's on Hulu now or something. So I think it's free for.
Oh, really?
I think so. I don't think I paid it.
Yeah. Well, because Louis C.K. was, trying to create a way. He wanted to make movies that were, somehow self financing,
Mm-hmm.
and so you want to put, write a feature film or TV series, whatever, and not have to beg, borrow, and steal from a streaming service. And he would, he would sell tickets basically. But now it's available. Yeah, it's really good. Did you enjoy it?
Yeah. Well, yes, I did. I was tuned in rather late, so I didn't watch the whole thing. I have to admit, but yeah, it's brilliant. Actually, I thought, and what a cast! Good heavens, Alan Alda as Uncle Pete. He's a badass.
Yeah.
It's very funny.
Yeah.
But I watched it just because of the fascination with the Irish family that you'd mentioned. Is that
there's a scene? I don't know if it was in the episode you saw. I don't want to spoil it, but I'll just give you where a woman talks about her love affair with an 80-something-year-old guy, and what attracted her was his smell. She just loved the way he smelled. I never saw anything like that before. And the monologue that she gives about their whole relationship and the writing was just superb. I mean, it's the Louis C.K.'s the one. That writing of that series is, it's at the level of Eugene O'Neill, Tennessee Williams. I mean, it's as good as it gets.
Yeah, I heard you say that.
Yeah, it's wonderful.
That's
and then himself, Louis C.K., screwed up the way men do. Jesus, men are so stupid. And just really stupid.
Yes, they are. Aren't those men?
He's a genius. He's a great talent. He's one of the great comic minds of our day, and stupid.
Yep. Just
stupid. But he's back. He's back, and he's just as great as ever. He just sold out Madison Square Garden.
Oh, is that true? I didn't know that.
Yeah. We went to buy a ticket, and we're none left. Madison Square Garden. What was that? 50,000 people? Something? I don't know. So he's he's a great talent, and so he's one of our greatest. So he'll be fine.
He'll be okay. Yeah. We don't have to worry about Louis.
But I just wish that had been a greater success to encourage him to come up with another cast of characters and to do this, because I'd pay $10 to see something, that's of quality.
Yeah, totally.
But anyway, he's terrific.
Very nice. So let me just ask you one final question. If you could go back and say to your 20-year-old self one piece of advice, what would that be?
Take more time with the women you meet. Don't rush into things.
Okay.
I have rushed into things too often in my life, but I got lucky, and I met the woman I love and I'm married to now for 20 years. And I almost blew that one. So that would be my advice.
Okay, good. I did say it was the last thing I'd ask you, but I lied. I have one more thing.
Cool it.
You also have said in past interviews and things that I've listened to that it takes about 10 years for somebody to become good at screenwriting, or 10 failures, or 10 screenplays that they've written. Yeah. So that's a real testament to persistence and not quitting.
Well, it's just fact. I mean, if you were to make a list of all the best of the best and whatever, and you went into their biographies, each and every one, and find out how old were they when they sold their first screenplay. They're probably in their 30s or 40s. On the other hand, there are these, surprising, especially in the action genre, young writers. But action, is for young people, and supernatural or science fiction action of various kinds, the superheroes and supervillains, but even the tough and gritty action stories that take place, in city streets and whatever. But action is a genre the young writers can tackle because there's a certain complexity of character, but it's not Louis C.K. Okay. Right. So, but generally speaking, it takes 10 years of hard work and failure to be a good anything. If you were, if you had to have an operation, would you like to be operated on by some doctor who just got out of medical school?
Or the guy who's been doing it for 10 years.
I'd like to see some gray hairs in that head. I'd like to, be under the knife of somebody who's been in that part of the human anatomy a few times before you. If you're in trouble with the law, would you want somebody to represent you who just got out of law school? I want Johnny Cochran. I want somebody who knows how to win.
Yeah.
And so how long does it take to master surgery, to master the human body, the human mind, the social system, the criminal justice system, business of all kinds? How long does it take to become a good business person, a good whatever?
Yeah.
Decade. With exceptions, but generally.
Yeah.
And so there's no difference. Why would it be easier to be a writer than a surgeon? It's not. So it's going to take time.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for all that you've done for writers everywhere to make that time a little less onerous, to learn the lessons that we need to learn through your story book and story seminars, and et cetera, et cetera. Thank you for teaching all those people who have written such great movies that we've all enjoyed over the years because they took your course. And
they just read my book and they did it themselves. I can't.
Yes, man.
I enjoy that people who have that I've taught have had great success, but I don't take credit for it. They had the talent. They studied, they worked hard, they came to me to learn what they didn't know, they did, they used it. And so I'm pleased, but I don't pat myself on the back.
Okay, well, I'll have to do it for you then. So thank you for doing it. And thank you for being here today, because it's been a real thrill and honor for me.
Yeah, that was great. It was great. Wonderful questions. Thank you very much.
Okay. Just hit the outro here and we'll just hang around. See you soon.
Okay.
This has been the Essential Coaching Skills Podcast. Thank you for being here. It's a pleasure seeing you again. Hope to see you again real soon. Come back next week when we have another gripping and exciting episode of the Essential Coaching Skills Podcast. And if you want to, you can find out more about us, each and every one of us, at essentialcoachingskills.com. Thanks.